Okay, thank you for tuning into Stampscaping 101. This is a square format, one that I haven't worked in quite some time, but I've been thinking about doing for a while. So when I got a request to do a square piece, that was a perfect opportunity to do it, get around to it, working in squares, or maybe doing some longer formats would be fun, like a kind of like a panorama bookmark style of a card format. Is something that I should play around with in the upcoming weeks, because you can get different looking compositions as far as the structure goes, depending on kind of the ratio that you're working in. So anyways, this one was working around the Lakeside Cove large, the Nebula stamp, which is one that I haven't used in quite some time. It's stamped right there. And working around this kind of, in this aqua kind of turquoise blue-green color scheme, which is one of my favorite color schemes to work in. I think it looks like, I don't know, it looks very rich and glowing to me, especially when you use like yellows underneath this color scheme. I've always liked like emeralds as far as jewels go, as far as the colors that those look like. It always reminds me of like a pirate movie or something like that. But anyways, a lot of texture in here. It's your basic looking color scheme as far as working with light tones and moving into darker tones. Distressing's in there as well, as far as that peeled paint green. But as I say in this video, just kind of line up your colors. Doesn't have to be brand specific, all right? And I just line them up going from light to dark. And that's how I start applying my colors into the scene after the composition has been established, okay? And I don't know, I guess there's not much more to say than that. I use the bare branch in the foreground, which I've been itching to do as well. And I just kind of built these leaves on it accordingly, And that made for a fun kind of foreground in here to kind of contrast against the lighter background. And of course for me, and anytime I'm doing any kind of deep space figure like that nebula, it really gives me the opportunity to go into the scene and add in a ton of little colored dots in the same colors out of my color scheme, like yellows and blues and white, something like that. So anyways, a really fun scene to do, and a good nice format to work in as far as something different, and a couple images that I haven't used in a while, so always kind of fun to get back and do some of the I don't know, different elements and components that I haven't done in a while. So if you watch this, I hope you enjoy it. Okay, we're going to do something that's going to be a little bit different from most of the other scenes that I've done on this channel, and that's I'm going to use a square piece of cardstock. This one's a 6" by 6" cardstock, and I don't know, different kind of ratios are something that I've thought I really need to play around with more often. This is just a 6" by 6 that I've cut out of a 8.5" by 11 sheet, and I can even do something like in a kind of narrow bookmarky type of size. And this one's kind of roughly a half sheet of 8.5" by 11, but I don't know, I think I should play around with like something really narrow like that, as well as squares and other sizes. I think we can kind of come up with some different looks, and just in terms of the starting point of our scenes when we do that. I'd love to do some things like on rounds and ovals as well. I haven't worked on like a round or an oval in really quite some time, since rounds and ovals were available in this surface called stamp board. But I think this opens up all kinds of opportunities as far as kind of different compositional looks, and I don't know, just the dynamics can change when you change your ratios around. Going from something like a 4.5 by 5.5 quarter sheet to a 4 by 6 or something like that isn't going to be a dramatic change, but certainly doing something like a square would kind of lend itself to an entirely different look at times. Okay, now on this one, I'm just going to play around with the that, you know, equal side aspect of the square. So I'm putting this, I'm just eyeballing it, but I'm kind of aiming this right for the center of the card, okay? All right, we have that. Now I'm going to continue this image out to the side of the card. So I'm overlapping my previous impression a little bit. 1/4 inch to, I don't know, 1/8 inch to a 1/4 inch or so. And I'm flipping the card upside down just because I can see it. It's easier for me to do this. I'm right-handed, so I always say just turn the card in the direction in which it's the most conducive to, you know, making your marks, your impressions, whatever. All right, now this is going to be a nighttime scene because the imagery that I'm going to be using in the sky is this nebula. This nebula here is my version, kind of a really liberal version of the Tarantula Nebula, they call it. It's a deep space object. And the scene is going to be done in some deep blue, greens, turquoises, okay? I always love that color scheme. I don't always use it, but I really like doing that. I like blues and cool tones as well, but adding a little bit of warmth kind of can deepen the kind of that visual space within the color scheme. All right, so this nebula. Nebulas are kind of deep space objects of glowing gases. So I really want this to stand out and look like it's, well, kind of glowing. So what color do you stamp this in? Okay, this is kind of roughly this color scheme that I'm going to be going with. Okay, there's blues, there's greens in here. I can add in some other greens as well. You can, now, it doesn't have to be brand specific, you know. I can go with things like mementos or something like that. You can see the different green tones, but what you would do is you would just kind of line up your colors in what you think is something going from light to dark, okay? Here's a distress ink in here. I don't know, that would probably go like in here somewhere, okay? See that transition? All right. I need something darker down here too, but I think you get the point. I would lay out your pads, you know, before you start the coloring process. Otherwise, you're going to be reaching in, pulling out a stack and stuff like that, you know. Just make things nice and easy for you and just get things lined up, ready to go. Okay, now, if this is going to be my light source in the scene, you'll never see a nebula that, you know, big or something like that, but that can make for a nice dramatic scene. But anyways, if that's going to be my light source and, you know, that's going to be the light that's casting, you know, being cast over my landscape in here, I'm going to make this the color of that color scheme. Now, you don't have to do that. I mean, I could stamp this in black as well and just plop it on down here and bring in some other tones, but I like to generally do that in some sort of color out of the color scheme. So, that being said, I want this to generally be fairly dark, okay? If I stamp this in like the lightest tone, like something like this in here, and bring it up, by the time I blend in some other tones in here on top of it, all, you know, that same color and darker ones, we're not going to be able to see any of this. It's going to kind of just blend away because it was stamped so light. So you have to go with kind of one of your darker values out of whatever color scheme you're working with. So, looking at something like this, I'm gonna go with something like that navy. If I, I could go with, well, maybe, I haven't used it in a while. I'm just looking at my stack of pads here, if this pad's okay. This pad's a little bit crumbly. A lot of my pads are starting to crumble at this time. I don't know, there was some kind of date in these pads here that it seems like they're kind of all starting to, the ones that I got, I don't know, this one's like a 20-year-old pad or something like that. It seems like they're all starting to crumble now. Well, how about one last scene for you? This is a Marvy pad, by the way. Alright, so if you're going to stamp along with me, and you don't have to do like this scene either, or this image, if you have any kind of sky image, like a Milky Way, or, the Starbirth one, or just some clouds, you can use whatever dark green, okay, is in your pad collection. That's a bottle green. It might look black to the camera here, but see that? It's a really super dark green. It's kind of a dark, like a blue-green. All right, but if you want to bring in some variation, if you have them, something like brush markers, dye-based brush markers. Okay, this one happens to be the Marvy brush marker. 1500. For some reason, I thought they were called the 1600 series. No, they have 1500. This is a light blue, and I just might go for a little bit of variation in here. It's a light blue. It's called the manganese blue. Now, yeah, I'm picking up a little bit of this green off of the stamp, but all I do is just kind of wiggle it off like that. And if your pens are fairly wet, you can see it's green up there. By the time I scribble it around, it's largely unpolluted. So I don't tend to worry about that. I believe in blending of the blending of colors, and I don't need my pens to be absolutely pristine. Plus, like I said, if I just kind of wipe it off in a certain area, wherever that green is, it's fine. Okay, so dark green and a little bit of variation of light blue, maybe. All right. I might not get a pure blue in here because it's mixing with some of that green in there, but I'm getting a little bit of variation, hopefully. So I never really know what it's going to look like until I do it. Okay, on this scene, this nebula, I can stamp it right over the top of these trees because these trees are a solid black, and the colors that I'm working with are a dye-based transparent color. So that if I just put it over my trees, it's not as though the nebula is going to look like it's in front of the tree, okay? Because the darkest things are going to show through. But now if I come way down here, I'm going to be getting into these rocks. And if that was the case, I would mask off the rocks just with a simple paper towel, but I'm just going to come down about like so, okay? I think I'm going to go like that star out this way. I mean, you can put it wherever you want, just kind of move it around and kind of decide. There's no right, position for this, or wrong. It's just wherever you want to put it, okay? There's a lot of surface area to this design, and a lot of the sky figures. So get a good amount of pressure, left, right, top, bottom, middle, especially in the middle. We don't want to stamp this out like this only. Pull it up, and then, the entire middle part of that didn't stamp out. Okay. I see a slight bit of variation, not too much. But anyways, I like it. All right. Now, in a lot of water scenes, I kind of feature a reflection down below, but I'm not going to do that in this. So I'm going to use this cloud Altocumulus. Someone's asked me to do that. And I'm going to just bring in some added texture. A lot of times I would use like the cloud cumulus with this one as well, but we're just going to do, where did my, here it is. I'm looking for this pad. The bottle rain again. I'm going to use this Altocumulus. The Altocumulus, though, in this scene is going to represent more of, it's going to look more like just texture, okay, in my water, and not so much an Altocumulus or mackerel sky, okay, like clouds, because I'm using it around this such a dominant type of image in that nebula, okay? So, I tell you what, I'll do this kind of an angle like this. How's that? And that'll give this kind of a little bit of a, kind of a dramatic imbalance, you know, in some ways. When you go with a bunch of diagonals, it creates a little bit of visual tension, which might be kind of interesting. It gives the scene a little bit of movement. Okay. All right, so we have that. Now I'm thinking, should I do that in the water? I'm wondering if I should keep the same angle. I'm trying to decide. I tell you what, I'm going to do that, but I'm going to do it very lightly. All right? We have that kind of scene moving that way, but I think I'm going to go with, I think I'm going to keep, it might look different. It might look, you know, in reality, you know, the reflections would go this way if that sky is going that way. But I think I'm going to keep it moving in the same direction. But I'm going to do it very subtle if I can. Okay, and that's going to, I'll use this distressing peeled paint. It's kind of a yellow greenish looking, kind of earthy yellow greenish tone. Let's see what this looks like. I tell you what, I did it this way with the smaller elements of this design going down the last time. I'm going to do it like this, going up this time. Okay. If you know me, you know I like texture in my scenes, so it has something like that. Looks kind of crazy, doesn't it, right now? But let's see where it gets to, okay? All right, now, one thing I know already is that because this is one of the lighter colors, when I blend in a lot of tones in here, a lot of this is going to disappear, so I'm probably going to have to go back in and stamp darker versions of this later. But I'll base that on how dark it gets down here. Okay, let's start off with our color scheme. And we'll start to define our lighting in here. Okay. Now in this case, we have a strong source of light as far as a dramatic image in the sky in the form of that nebula. So let's do something to really pop that image out from the background, okay? Let's see, I need a couple tips here. My stylus tool, actually this one looks clean, I'll use that. Let's start off with the distress ink again, alright? So, light sources here in the form of the nebula, and we'll have some areas lit down here on the water's surface reflecting the lighting from that nebula. So it's going to be light here, and basically dark around like that. Alright? But with some variation, okay? It doesn't have to be exactly like that, you know. There's a lot of movement in here, so we're going to make things not quite so regular, okay? I'll have some streaks here and there. I'll leave some areas of light, maybe. Now, with your lightest colors, you want to get a good amount of coverage with this, okay? Now, I'm starting to streak some of that darker green in here, but that's going to be fine because I'm going to use a lot of color in here anyway. There's going to be a ton of blending that's occurring. Okay, so see, what I do is I take the area around my nebula and I'm making it darker, and that makes the nebula stand out lighter, okay? Now the darker I take this area out here, the lighter that's going to seem by contrast, right? So that being said, my lightest colors, in this case the peeled paint, is going to go into my nebula a little bit, just so it's not so stark white, but I might not want a full saturation of it. So what I'm doing is when I get into that light area, or my light source, I'm using kind of a drier tip. So it's really wet when I'm going on the outside, you see. Every time I re-ink it, I start on the outside and blend it in. But after this really starts to get dry, that's when I do get closer or into my light sources, just with a kind of a very pale application of it, okay? And that's how you really get a lot of control over your application of ink, okay? So see, I mean, this is still coming off here, but see how I'm doing this? I'm not scrubbing hard to get it darker. I'm just making multiple passes, and that applies color in a very kind of controlled and incremental process. All right? Okay, now if this is the color light that's in a scene, greens, turquoises, whatever, I'm going to apply this same color. If it's casting that light, that's the light that's going to be, you know, reflected off of, you know, my different objects, rocks and whatever. But here's what I'm doing here too. If you'll notice, some of these rocks I'll leave just white, like that. Alright, now, so, you know, I inked up a lot of these and it got darker, so there wasn't, you know, a set number or area of rocks that I was going to keep light. I just want some of them a little bit lighter on the top surface, okay? And it doesn't really matter which ones you retain light on, okay? My suggestion is just don't tone them all out so that you get a little bit of variation in some areas, okay? And that's how you control light. You just don't tone everything out. You know, there's really no kind of secret or precarious way to do it. Now here in the water, I'm going to leave some of this light, but with this lightest tone, you do want to get a pretty decent amount of coverage because we have a lot of colors to go, okay? And the darker we go with some colors, the less ink we're going to be applying with those colors, because they're going to be more, you know, the darker colors are going to be kind of just on the perimeter. So that we have a nice transition going from light to dark, okay? The darker colors just kind of stay out here. So in other words, I don't want to leave this big area just white, because then I only have this little tiny area to work with, you know, blending in additional tones, okay? So the lightest colors go in here. Maybe the next color goes in roughly the same areas, but by the time I get to the medium tones, maybe they're kind of here, and the darker tones kind of go into here. That's just a kind of a general, you know, way to work. I mean, you know, there might be other areas that, you know, have some shadows in it, you know, in the center of the scene or something like that. Then you would, you know, you would make it darker accordingly. But just as far as a general statement, you use less ink. You apply less ink in the darker tones. But anyways, this is just working with peeled paint. This is working with one color so far, okay? And you can see where I've added more of it in some areas like the perimeter. And, you know, this is making a pretty decent lighting statement right now, just using one tone. So you can imagine the variation we might achieve working through a lot more tones. Okay, that was the peeled paint. Let's try the light green, number 11 from Marvy. This light green is going to be really, really kind of hot and vibrant. Well, I guess it looks a little bit more earthy because it's put on top of the peeled paint, which is kind of more of an earthy green, and that's fine. And I'm just kind of going off of my peeled paint application as far as where I'm applying this one. We're still in a very light tone, so I'm, you know, getting a pretty decent amount of coverage with it. Maybe I can come into my Nebula a little bit. See that really super vibrant green down there? That's what this green can provide, the light green. Okay. Sometimes the brightest areas, you know, in terms of color, brightness in terms of not lightness but brightness, the relative intensity of a color. Sometimes the most intense areas are in the shadows because it's not being kind of washed out by light, like a high noon light or something. So, that being said, I'm adding quite a bit of this tone into the shadow areas, okay? We'll also make those areas darker as well when we get to those colors. Okay. So working along. Now I do, as I just moved to my next color, okay? See my stack right here. When I'm done with one tone, you just move to your next. This one's a Caribbean blue. Yeah, this is a green tone scene, but blues go very nicely with green, of course, because it's a component of green. Okay, adding in some streaks down here. You can see the difference between one side of the scene with the Caribbean blue and one side, you know, that doesn't have it. It doesn't have to be a Caribbean blue, it's just saying that, you know, once you go with another color, it can look that much richer in terms of the saturation. Again, these are transparent colors, so the colors underneath show through. Where I'm taking some of this blue into that white, it reads more as pure blue, which is kind of a nice variation. See that area in there where I'm kind of streaking it in? This is a very light touch. I'm just kind of touching the paper with it. But see how I'm making multiple passes. I'm not trying to get, you know, things dark right with one, you know, forceful swipe with my applicator, okay? A little bit of that blue in there. I love that blue. I don't use this blue enough. I need to use it more often. It's a super bright, really clean blue, like down there. Let's see. See right there? I even brought a lot of it right up in here. Okay. Alright, so I don't know why I didn't use this blue more often. Well, I guess this wasn't right in front of me. It was up on my shelf. Okay, now this salvia blue, this one's going to be too light. It's not even going to show. I know, because I look at this and I think, okay, it's already darker than that blue, so. Now remember, these are transparent colors, so, you know, you're not going to put like a light blue over something dark and have it get lighter, okay? So things just get darker. So if things are already darker than a given color, you're not going to put a light one on top of it and have it get darker. So, that being said, just skip it and move on to your next tone. Okay, but this is turquoise, alright? It's kind of officially using turquoise. If you don't have a turquoise and you want to get a turquoise-looking scene, color scheme, just go with blues and greens, and when you overlap them together, they will form a turquoise, okay? Just visually, they're not actually, you know, they're not mixing. Colors aren't mixing on the card, they're just kind of overlapping one another. And the colors underneath will influence kind of what you see as the end result, looking at it. Okay, hitting my shadows a little bit more, kind of around my rocks, to kind of make it appear as though they're kind of sitting in the scene a little bit more, so I'll need to go darker right here and right over here. It's kind of like what I call anchoring your imagery down into the scene. Okay, so that is the turquoise. Now, I have a feeling that this is going to start getting much more kind of influenced by blue when I move to my new tone. This one's the light blue. I tell you what, I'm going to use my clean tip on this one so I get just more of the pure blue in here. It's not going to look blue because it'll be, you know, green, but underneath. But I have a feeling that it will start changing the hue a little bit as far as what we see. See, then I'm not going into this light area too much. I did a little bit of a kind of a dry brush streak of that blue kind of in there. But for the most part, you know, I'm staying a little bit more out on the perimeter with this one. I need to get a little bit in here, right at the base of those rocks, to create some shadows around the rocks, but I'm not going in quite as far as I did with some of the lighter tones. Now, if I do go in there, though, in those lighter areas, it's just going to be with a kind of a light streak like that, okay? It's very dry, not this. I don't want that, you know, in the middle here, okay? Okay, adding this at the base of the rocks in the distance. Right in the shadows, four corners, for a bit of a vignette. Okay, let's do it up here in the sky as well. The sky is looking a little bit busy for me, but I know I'm going to get darker out there, and it will start to kind of mellow out that, you know, kind of busy looking sky area, and it'll all blend in nice and gracefully. At least that's the idea. Okay, that was the light blue. It's kind of more of a medium blue, as I've said in other videos. I'm starting to, you can still see that texture down there, right? But looking at it like this, it just ends up being additional texture. All right, let's start moving into kind of our darker tones. Like, this navy looking blue from Marvy. It's just called blue. Okay, now it's still kind of more predominantly green in this scene, okay? So let's start making it a little bit more bluish, turquoise, deep blue, kind of emerald, green, blue, you know, that whole, I don't know, color scheme. Okay. Hit the shadows with it. Alright, get the shadows on this side. Being careful around that light area with this dark tone, okay? At this point in time, you don't want to get like one of these shapes right in the middle in there, okay? If you do, you know, just go in and blend it out more, but if you don't have to kind of do repair work, just, you know, just take it nice and gradually as far as your application process, okay? When you're using darker tone too, just kind of slow the rate at which you take it into the interior. You know, when you're working with the really light colors, you can just go right in there because they're so light to begin with. But the darker tones would stand to leave kind of a stronger mark on your scenes. And it stays dark on the tip a lot longer because the page starts to become saturated with ink, so it doesn't come off your tip quite as fast and, you know, absorbed and transferred over to the paper, because it's kind of like applying wet into wet. All right, let's take it kind of darker around in here. Now, if you've watched my video on lighting, simple lighting approaches, a lot of times I have this area of light up in here somewhere, okay? And what I do is I take my areas of darkness out here and I kind of bring it around in here to separate that region of light and a region of reflected light down here. So what you have is kind of dark, and it goes in like that, and dark comes out here. And that little separation in the middle makes the region underneath it kind of reflected light, okay? Instead of having just one big glowing area of lightness like that and everything else is dark, you know, I like having that separation between there. In this case, I'm doing it in the form of these shadows as well, okay? And I'm going to use one of my favorite blues. It's kind of a dark blue, almost black, Prussian blue, okay? And that'll come right after this one. All right, so we have our kind of reflected light down here. Prussian blue will be kind of in the shadows in the four corners. Not all types of ink have the same characteristics. Marvy inks in general are a little bit thinner than a lot of brands of inks. And Prussian blue, within that range of thinner inks, seems to be even thinner. So I'm getting at that because when I start applying some of these tones like this, they spread nicely, and, you know, with like one or two swipes, I really can't see anything because it's not, the ink isn't transferring over to the paper quite so fast, but the Prussian blue can really transfer. I don't know, for some reason, just, I mean, I make a few swipes and it's really dark right there. It's because it's penetrating the thicker layers of ink that we have on there already. So, that being said, just with each new color that you apply, change the rate at which you apply it, okay? Get a feel, especially if you're using different brands of inks. Kind of start applying it in a nice, light manner until you kind of get the gist of it, you know, of how that color is going to apply, okay? This one applies fast, no matter how much ink I seem to have already applied on the card. If anyone ever kind of does something in air, you know, they get like a big glob of, you know, super dark ink in here, it's usually with their darker colors because they take it in too fast. All right. So what I'm getting at, like with this Prussian blue especially, is, you know, just stay on the perimeter a little bit longer, all right, before you take it into the scene, okay? Now, normally you don't have to be so precarious like this because this Prussian blue is a lot, you know, much thinner, it seems, than other inks. So it gets really dark like that. You can see it on that side and this side, you know, where this blue is certainly not, you know, light. That's how dark it got over there. But look how much darker that is right there in the form of that Prussian blue. I'm not sure if there's other blues out there like that, you know, that do that. If there is, I haven't come across it. Most are kind of the opposite. They're kind of thick. So sometimes, at this point in time, if you're using certain brands of inks, and you're doing this across the scene, it's almost like you're mopping off color, because it's just so thick. As far as the inks go. The ink, I guess, I don't know, viscosity. Okay. We don't have to go with so many, like, blues like I just did, but it's one of those things, the more you go with, potentially, the scene can be, you know, that much richer in terms of the saturation of colors. Let's see if I can get some kind of streaks going in here with this Prussian blue. A little bit. Okay, how's that looking? Anyways, that is a lot of fun. Alright. Now, I stamped out the Lakeside Cove in black. So I'm going to finish off some toning with black as well. And I'll kind of concentrate on the perimeter. Like I said, the darkest tones you don't usually take in quite as far as you did with your, you know, your lighter and medium value tones. Okay, so hitting this up in the shadow areas of the design. Okay, see it on one side, and this is on the other side. I think that looks a little bit more integrated as far as that image goes by doing some toning with the same color that you did your darkest images in. In this case it's black, of course. Okay, doing it on the other side. I'll put something in the foreground as well. I haven't decided. I might want to use this branch that I've had on my desk that I've wanted to use, though. Okay. Kind of working it up. You see how I kind of work an area? I'm not trying to tone the whole perimeter like this, okay? I work a little bit of area like that, and I blend that over, and then I go and work in this area, okay? When I do that, I get this nice transition of value because I'm usually working from wet like this, okay? And as I work it into my scene, it's getting drier and drier, okay? That way I get a nice transition of the dry, and the wet version of that ink to the dry version of it, okay? And that's not easy to do if you're doing it like this, okay? When you do it like too much like this, there's like a solid band of color, and there's not so much of this like transition, okay, of dark to light. Okay. Always love doing deep space images, so when the request came in for this one, I thought I'd jump at the chance. Not that I can't do it anyway, but I don't know, I have so many videos and content in my head, it's hard to do it all, you know. You do it, what do? You know, you stamp out one scene at a time, as they say, right? Okay, so that is my imagery. So far as it stands, we have that nice, deep, I don't know, green, turquoises, blues, and running in there. Now, I want to create more depth. That's what I'm doing lately. I think I'm getting better at creating additional texture in my scenes, and I'm going to add in some of these rocks. This image is really small, but it's one of my favorites, the Tiny Rocks stamp. And I think I'm going to do this in, well, some colors out of my color scheme, okay? As opposed to doing it in black. I might add some black ones, but I'm going to do it in like a turquoise. I can go for multiple impressions because I want some lighter versions of it in the lighter areas, okay? That's about 3 impressions of it. Okay, 1, 2, 3. I mean, I can also do kind of some water texture, but I want this water to seem very still. So I'm not going to put that. I'm just going to put these textures down. Okay. And what this is doing is it's kind of giving us a little bit of an idea that, you know, the water is crystal clear and you can really see the, you know, the rocks or the, you know, the bottom of the lake. Okay, that was the turquoise. Now, in these darker areas out here where you can't really see that turquoise, I'll do it in like something like blue. Okay. So now I'm putting this in the darker areas, okay? I'm not putting the dark blue in that light area. I mean, I could, but, you know, it might be like the second or third impression of it. So it's a much lighter version of it. Okay, so we have something like that. See how it looks from a distance. And, dare I do it? Why not? Let's do it in Prussian blue as well, but in the darkest of areas, okay? Like the corners. Whether or not this, you know, I mean, I'll be able to see some of these rocks, but I'm not quite sure which ones I'll see in the darker areas after this dries, they might be a little bit more subtle looking than how they look right now. Okay. Now that's freshly stamped. That's going to mellow out a little bit. Okay. With some additional, drying time. And that's what I'm counting on. Okay. I have this smaller version too, but I think I'm just going to leave it with that larger version of the tiny rocks. Okay, so we have that. Now, the scene can use a little bit of foreground, okay? Now, I think I'm going to do something with my bare branch large stamp. Okay, it looks like this. But when I designed it, I had this little accompaniment of this leaf sprig, okay? And that's because I don't want to create, first of all, I don't want to create a gigantic design, but I've created these leaves so that I can make a branch with as much foliage as I wanted to. If I wanted to have a bare branch, I could have that. So let's add this into our foreground. And I'm going to do this in black. If I did it in green, it wouldn't even show up. Well, it might if I overlap that lightest of areas, but then you wouldn't be able to see the branch down here because it'd be just too light. So you want to go dark on this. And why don't I go... Let's see, I'll go this way. Just using this kind of top portion of it. Okay. See that right there? See how great it looks against that kind of that vibrant, glowing background. I think this foreground is just any type of foreground in a scene, when you're doing that, it's just so much fun seeing the kind of the end result like that of kind of large, darker imagery like that over the background. It's not to obscure the background, but it makes everything in the background kind of more, I don't know, it's kind of integrated and deep. Things that are light seem lighter because you put something dark next to it. If something's kind of soft, it makes it look softer by having something kind of hard in front of it. Okay, so it just keeps building, all right? Like so, right? Now, let's add some additional foliage. I think it looks good as is, but why not? Okay. I'm just going to start adding some of this. See this little stem down here, right here? I'm going to aim for that on these branches down below, okay? And it's not hard. I just kind of get down, on eyes level, and I just kind of aim for that little point, kind of sticking out. Okay. And I'm re-inking in between each impression so that it stamps out nice and dark and full. Okay. On the right side, you can see how it looks. Isn't that fun? That is really fun to do. let's see. Okay, let's take a look. Okay. I'd get hooked on that little combination set. They can be done, you know, apart from each other, but they go hand in hand, nice, you know, very nicely. And see, I mean, like over here, see, this is why it's done in two different images, because see, it gets so dark over here that maybe I might not want, you know, to be so much pattern and busyness over here in the darker area. So I've just kind of left those branches as is. Same thing right here. There's a little bit more, you know, foliage right here in the lighter area, but as it moves out here, like, and see these ones moving up into here, I'm just going to leave them bare because it got dark back there. So I just have that kind of branch leading up in that. So it doesn't become so busy in the darker areas. You know, I think that would look too, well, busy. So that's why that stamp, or those stamps, are that way. Or one of the reasons. You know, like I said, I don't want to come out with a gigantic, you know, 8 by 8 inch stamp, you know, with a lot of variations of thick branches and thin branches, you know, leaves all over the place, you know. It was just easier to do it in two. Okay, so let's take a look now and look for some additional opportunities to enhance this scene. If you have different colors of things like gel pens, light blues, greens, any colors out of this color scheme, you can use them in here to kind of enhance things. This is a Sharpie Aqua paint pen. Okay. This is water-based. Now I'm going to hit some stars up here. Now, like I said, you know, just flip it around because my hand is right here as opposed to, you know, doing something across the page. Make sure this is working fine. Okay, there we go. All right, now we've lost some of the, you know, that star kind of texture running in here because it got very dark, of course. You can see the stars in the image right here. Okay. Now, I'm not going to try and just draw them exactly back in where they were, you know, kind of made obscure with the tone, but I'm just going to add in some additional textures, okay? Now this one, like I said, this is a aqua color paint pen, so I can add this into kind of some of the darker areas, and it's not going to show, or yeah, it's not going to show as much as, you know, like a white dot would, okay? And I kind of cluster these a little bit. I try to, you know, make a conscious effort to apply these in a little bit more of a random configuration than having, you know, all these little dots, you know, like a perfectly, you know, 1/8 inch apart, which people tend to do, and I tend to do too. So you can see that it's all like a 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch apart. So what I do is I try to cluster a few and have a few kind of isolated, and I think that looks a little bit more realistic. you want to draw a bigger one, like a bigger star, than just kind of, you know, scribble it in like that. You can't really underestimate what kind of some additional texture can do and contrast. I mean, these are little dots in dark areas, so they really kind of stand out. Okay. Now, if there's some sort of kind of reflective quality in your water, you can add some of those down there as well. In photography, they call it specular light. It's light that's brighter than white. Okay. Now I'm using the green right now, but you know, I'll use a little bit of the white pen as well. A lot of times I'll add on a few little highlights on my branches, kind of to reiterate lighting. I'm trying to decide if I want to do that. Maybe I'll put a few little highlights, but not many. Okay, on a few of these branches. Kind of like so. Alright, you can see a few over here. A couple on the branches right here. Might be like one dot or two dots here and there on kind of on the leaf. I don't know if there's kind of like metallic green paint pens or gel pens out there. There might be, but that would look kind of interesting. Alright, I don't think the Signo lime green is going to work in here, but it would be kind of nice if it did. It doesn't. You know what? I think it's the... Well, that's a 0.7. I don't know, maybe I need a larger ball. But the, let me see, where was it? I was mentioning in another video that the jelly roll... I wish I had a lime green or something like that, but these jelly rolls work really well. Seemingly, this is a yellow, and since I used yellow in the scene, I can add some more of this, okay? But I'm adding it kind of in the area where you already see a little bit of yellow still. It just kind of gives a little bit of surface to, additional surface to your water by having kind of these sparkly little tones over the top of it. We have some stars up here. You can kind of intermingle some yellow stars with your blue ones because, you know, you certainly used some yellow in the color scheme. Okay, so I have some of that going. Let me show you. Let me see if I can zoom in here a little bit. So you see the blue ones and the yellow ones there. I have a lot of the yellow ones right in here, but you see some of the blue and yellow. Same thing up here. A little mingling of the textures. Okay, now let's see what a white paint gel pen will look like. Okay, this is the Uniball Signo as well. Okay, and I have a feeling that these ones are going to stand out even more because they're creating greater contrast. You know, white against dark. So I'm going to start it in my lighter areas, okay? And maybe I won't go too extreme with this one as far as the number of these kind of brighter, you know, lighter textures, dots. In this case there. Up here they represent stars. If I put it on a rock or something like, you know, underneath, it would represent kind of a highlight, you know. Okay, that up in the sky, nice and textural and deep. Okay, I'm adding more of these. It's just too much fun and I like the look of it. Okay, down here in my water, a little bit more of that specular light. Okay, that's what it looks like down in the water. You see some of those are a little bit more white. I've kind of done a little trail of them like that, like 4 dots in a row, like on a horizon kind of line. Configuration, kind of to go with the little striations in the water. If I want some of these rocks to look like they're kind of reflecting a little bit more light, maybe on the top surface, I can go with a few little dots on some of these rocks, like so. I wouldn't put too much of this ink if the rock is dark, okay? Because the white would stand out too much. You can do it with, like, you know, that blue or something like that, where it's not quite so extreme as far as the highlight goes. But anyways, I put a little bit onto some of those rocks. I mean, I can do some blue ones out here for these ones, but the white ones are back in there. And let's see what we have here as far as pen colors go. We have some blues, greens, and in the form of the La Plume Permanents. There are alcohol-based markers. You use whatever alcohol-based ones you want. And I'm just going to go in for some additional little details, maybe putting some of this down by some of these rocks, the water's edge. This is a very light blue, okay? So I'm starting off kind of light with it. You know, if I want to go darker, I can go darker. If you go too dark, well, you can kind of blend some of it away a little bit with a blender pen or just a lighter color of, you know, blue. Putting a little streak in here and there with the pen. Alright, this was an aquamarine, but basically it's just a very light blue. This one is a spearmint. Good name for a green. I'm taking some of these rocks and making them a little bit darker on their side. Hitting some of that area right around the base of the rocks as well. And this one is a cyan blue. A little bit darker now. Deepening my shadows. Okay. Kind of going in like that. It'll dry a little bit differently. But that is basically it. Maybe like a little bit of shadows on some of those subsurface rocks if I can. Alright, so there we have it. No title in mind for it, but it's kind of fun. This is a metallic gold gel pen. I'll put a few little marks with that. Kind of gold goes well with this kind of a emerald looking color scheme. In some of the other videos I mentioned that these little metallic pens can be that little finishing touch that when you put it over areas that are about the same value of it, medium tones, darker tones, you can't, a lot of times you don't see it, you know, on the card at all because it just kind of blends in with the background. But of course the nature of it being reflective, if someone were to hold up your card to the light and really kind of look at some of that texture, it'll reflect back some of that gold, that golden reflective quality. Okay. So, I don't know, let's see if I can get it. Yeah, you see it up here in that area. You can see those little those little golden effects. There we go. There, if I can get that light to shine across it. But anyways, that type of stuff is really fun to add into a scene. And all of those different types of things gives it some little bit of extra texture. But the main point of this scene was just to kind of create a deep saturation of a given color scheme. All right, we have our sky figures, and sky figures, be it a moon or a sun or a cloud, or in this case it's a deep space image of a nebula, you know, these glowing gases. For me, it's important to kind of bring them out and make them look as though they are the brightest thing in the area because it's supposed to represent lighting, okay? And now we don't work with lighting in a scene because we don't have like flashlights behind our cards, you know, where it's glowing, or like on a computer screen like you're looking at right now. It's, you know, it's defined by light. But on a card like this, we're talking about reflected light. So, you know, in order to define light, we have to put, you know, create contrast around those areas. So in making contrast and making something light in my scenes, and you can watch this on my video on easy lighting schemes. A lot of times I have an area of light, and again, it's just kind of, you know, obscured a little, or not obscured, but made light by having a band of darkness in between the light and the reflected light. Just for your darker tones, see, I stay with the darker tones out here. I don't go into this area with my darker tones, so light tones go into here, medium tones go about right here, and the darker tones are like from here to here. And that's how you create this transition of light to dark, like that. And it's nice and gradual. and you get all the richness and the transition of that lighting just by how much you use of your darker tones, okay? So the most coverage you're ever going to get is with the lighter tones. When you get into these darker ones, okay, here, it's mostly kind of on the perimeters, on the edges like that. And that way we get a card, an end result that looks like it's kind of, you know, for me, it looks like it's kind of glowing, all right? Now, sometimes I get down to an end result like this, and see this branch right here is in black, and right over here, I think I can even get a little bit darker, but I think by spraying this too, it'll bring out the, you know, a much deeper looking value. When you know, kind of spray this, everything gets a little bit darker and it looks like a freshly stamped scene in terms of the wetness and intensity of colors. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this scene. You can do this scene with any sky figure up there. There's the nebula, you know, suns, moons, stars, clouds, anything like that. You can have it reflected down here. In this case, I didn't, because I thought, I don't want two nebula in here and down here. But I might want some of the textures that were going on up there, so I put some of those Altocumulus clouds down there just for a little bit of extra texture in this area, just to give it a little bit of movement and kind of visual interest. So anyways, thanks again, as always, for watching. I had a lot of fun on this, as I do in all scenes, and kind of working around with, you know, that image that I haven't used in a while in the form of the nebula, and also that color scheme that I like a lot. I don't remember when the last time I did that one was, but the square format was fun too. So anyways, hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed stamping it. I'm thinking about a matting for this and what colors I should use for a matte. Undecided, so I'll try to figure it out later.